Sheriff, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about the internal affairs investigation that was conducted regarding the Sheriff Perrywinkle case a couple months ago. It took a little while to get this thing completed, and as you'll see, the investigation was completed on the 16th, which was a couple of days ago. That's when I signed off on it. It was late on that day. And then I had to wait a couple of days in order to share this with you because the people that were involved, some of them work in the communications center, some of them work in investigations, and they all work different shifts, and the comm center people were off. So they got back to work today, and I was able to do this, and it was only fair that they could hear from us rather than you what we did with this. So I think you have a copy of the summation. There were several charges sustained against several individuals in this case. I'll just kind of run through those and then answer whatever questions you might have. PICO on here is the Police Emergency Communications Officer, PICO P.L. Robinson. There were charges sustained for failure to conform to work standards. She got the initial call from Rain Perrywinkle. The information that she received in that call should have been interpreted as her as an abduction, and it should have been dispatched as an abduction. It was dispatched just as a missing person. That causes a couple of problems. When an abduction goes out, there's a couple of things that happen automatically. The PIO is notified, and yours goes out to you guys. And those didn't happen because it went out just as a missing person. So Pico Robinson received a 3-day suspension for that. Just going down the list, Pico Fouché, he was working on a different frequency. He got a call from one of our pilots that was just getting off work at the air unit and said, hey, I hear there's something going on out in Zone 6, which is where this happened. Do you need me out there? And he was told, no, we don't need you. And 1 minute later, they asked for the air unit, and he just told them that the air unit wasn't available. And so sometime later, the lieutenant called him and said, I need the air unit calling out from home. And so they had to then call this guy from home, and we could have gotten him a little bit sooner. Pico 3, which is a Sergeant Williams, and also Pico 4, which is a Lieutenant Leonard. Very similar facts in those. Once they realized what the call was, as the updates came in, they realized that it was an abduction. They should have upgraded that call. They should have called out PIO. They should have notified the news media. They didn't do that. All three of those individuals, Fouché, Williams, and Leonard, received a written reprimand. There were a few people out there in the patrol division. We investigated their response. We didn't sustain any charges against any of those individuals that were out there. In the detective division, Sergeant Lonnie Mills was the sergeant that responded out there. He did notify his lieutenant initially when he got the call, and he responded to the scene, and then he later notified the lieutenant again that he was going to do an Amber Alert. But he really failed to acquire additional resources that he needed. We have what's called a CART team. It's a child abduction response team. We have local people here in our homicide unit that are members of that. It's a regional team. It's resources that could have been used in a case like this. So for failure to take appropriate action, he was given a level 2 written reprimand. And then Homicide Lieutenant Rob Schoonover got a call around midnight from Sergeant Mills that there was a possible abduction of this 8-year-old little girl. Mills was not at the scene yet, so Schoonover told him to go to the scene, call me when you get there, let me know what you got. A couple hours later, when Mills called and told him that it looks like it's an abduction, I need your authority to put out an Amber Alert. Lieutenant Schoonover still didn't respond to the scene. An Amber Alert requires the lieutenant to approve it, and he already knew that we had an 8-year-old that had possibly been abducted. There was a lot of information on that scene. Well, let me finish with this, and then I'll get back to that. So for that, Sergeant Mills was given a level 2 written reprimand for failure to take appropriate action. Lieutenant Schoonover for failing to respond to the scene and notify the rest of his chain of command, which would have called out the appropriate staff people that would have made the correct notifications of people who would call, such as the media. And for him not doing that and responding to that scene, even after authorizing that Amber Alert, he was given a 3-day suspension. There were a lot of things that went really well on that scene, if I'm completely honest with you. The fact that we had a child abducted, and within about 10 hours, we had identified, located, and arrested the suspect, and also found the little girl. It is really, it's really good. If you look around the country at cases of abductions, it's really, really good. So I'm not faulting the work that they did at the scene. really what I'm faulting is some of the things they should have done that they didn't do. There wasn't a couple of years broadcast that went out to the media. I think all of you are aware of that. The initial call went out and said that homicide was responding to the Walmart. Nobody from the media responded to that, but you know what? That's really on us. If we get to a scene and we need you there, we need to call you. And that wasn't done. I've been talking to some of our folks around here and tell them, you know, do I think that if we'd have called you and by 2:30 or so in the morning you'd have been able to put on the news that she was missing and she was in this white van, do I think that we would have found her in time to save her? Probably not. But if that was your 8-year-old little girl, would you want us to try? And that's what it comes down to. I mean, generally speaking, when you look at these kinds of cases and people that do this sort of crime, they've got in their mind what they're going to do and they do it fairly quickly. And you know, unfortunately, you don't get to save a lot of these kinds of victims, but we didn't do everything that we could. I don't think it probably really would have changed the outcome, but they should have done everything that they could. So that's what we have on this. If you have any questions, I don't have a lot of stuff, you know, on the criminal case of that, but I can probably talk more about this if it's confusing to you.
How long was it between the missing person and the abduction in the change in those two calls? How much time?
Well, I don't really know I don't know if I have that, because honestly, you got to understand the way we work too. Once the officers arrive on the scene, then they have some responsibility to change the signal, because they're the ones that are there. And as you know, because when we send an ears out to you, we send it to you as, this is what's reported. We know full well that oftentimes that's not what ends up being the case. We know that you know, we get there and we find out, okay, that's not really the way it was. So the officers on the scene had some responsibility to change it. And that's what notifying the staff would have done. If there had been a lieutenant there and an assistant chief and a chief and me, we'd been doing more of that.
Where was Scoot home?
He was at home.
Did he not respond to the calls at all, or?
At some point, way later, around 5 in the morning, when he was notified that they had identified this subject and that he was a sexual offender, he responded to the scene at that point.
Did he issue the Amber Alert?
The Amber Alert was issued by the sergeant that was there.
Was there any delay in issuing the Amber Alert because of any actions taken?
No, I don't believe so.
So
the thing that they have to do, and you'd have to understand the way an Amber Alert works, we're not in control of those, FDLE is. And it's a very methodical process to do it. It takes a while. You have to, you know, and it's in the middle of the night, and you got to get people up to do it. And you have to meet very specific criteria. And actually, they got the Amber Alert almost completed, and then they got the information on Donald Smith, so they sort of stopped and backtracked because they wanted to get the best information out that they could. But no, I think the Amber Alert went out when it should have.
What do you say to? What have y'all learned moving forward from this case? I mean, what can y'all do differently?
Well, like the only things that I was not comfortable with us doing was getting enough ranking people on the scene to be looking out for those overarching issues that take place out there. When I met with the homicide team a day or so after to do a little debrief on what happened, I told them I never was a homicide detective. I'm not going to pretend to tell them how to be a homicide detective, but I've had some rank and I have managed big scenes, and that's what I'm good at. And if I were there, I would have been thinking about those bigger picture things, and that's why they need to make those notifications and get people out there.
Could you speak to the parents out there, anyone concerned in the community, about how this will be handled in the future, just in case it was their child who went through this as well? Sure.
Well, you know, I think when we issue discipline, it's corrective in nature. That's what it's for. Everybody's going to know that we did this. Everybody knows that we're going to follow our rules. Again, let me tell you that. You know, I don't think that anything that any of these people did affected the outcome of this case, because I believe that people like Donald Smith have already made up their mind what they're going to do, and they've sort of planned it out, whether it's very detailed or not, and they carry it out. But I also know that there were things that should have been done that did not get done, so we need to address those.
Were these suspensions with or without pay, and did anybody be moved from their current position?
The suspensions are without pay, and that's just on the communications officer Robinson and on Lieutenant Schoonover. They both have some rights under their contracts to contest that, and so that's what I recommended. And when I signed off, is they're going to get suspensions. They can appeal that, and that process will take a little while to work out. Sergeant Mills and Lieutenant Schoonover are both being moved from homicide.
So they have not been suspended as of yet?
No, they've been told that they will be suspended, but they get to go through the process.
It appears to us that a lot has changed in the information that you send to us, and perhaps even the caution in some of the calls that you've received. like abductions, if you will. Are there specific changes that have been made to JSO policy as a result of this case specifically?
If I understand what you're asking, we used to, the trouble with when we try to put information out to you is when we get a call on the phone to the communications center, often when we get to the scene, that's not exactly what happened. So in order to not mislead you and anybody else, we were doing fairly basic information, and that's why you got the ones that said homicide is responding to this location. After this, we talked through this. I don't know who all maybe from the media may have been involved, but we did go through it. And as you know now, what we say now is we're responding to a reported whatever it is. Now, we do that, kind of with a caveat that when we get there, it might not be that. That's what's been reported to us as, and when we get there, we'll let you know better. And we also, at that time, changed, maybe we had already made the change, but where we are given a specific place and time that we're going to do, because I know it might not have anything to do with this case, but there were some concerns because you guys get out there and you have a job to do to go around and talk to the man on the street, if you will, and sometimes you miss what we do at this location. So our policy now says that we will issue notice with at least 30 minutes warning that we're going to be at this location at this time, which hopefully makes it easier for you to make it back around there.
You mentioned that Mills and Schoonover will be removed from homicide. Is this going to be considered a demotion? Will they have roughly the same?
They will have the same positions. All of our positions here are lateral. It's not a promotion to go to the detective division. So they will both go back to patrol. Mills will still be a sergeant. Schoonover will still be a lieutenant. They'll just be working somewhere else.
And to be clear, because you had mentioned that it would have taken Schoonover to get the Amber Alert process moving forward, but that he wasn't originally on the scene. You did say earlier you don't believe there was any kind of delay, so he got that going.
Well, no, Mills did the procedure. He needed Schoonover's permission to do it, and we called him around 2-something in the morning, and he got that permission. So it moved forward like it should have. The reason for mentioning that was because Schoonover, that was the second time he had been called. The first time he was told that they had video of this man taking this little girl out of Walmart, and the second time he was told, we think there's an abduction, we need to do an Amber Alert. And neither of those jarred him to get up and go to the scene, and he should have. If there's ever a call that the homicide lieutenant should get there behind out of bed and go to, it's an abducted child.
Has anyone contacted Rain Perrywinkle about these suspensions as yet from your office?
No, but I believe she's listening to me.
So she didn't know about this before all of this?
No, and the timing of this was a little bit hard for me. That's why I started out telling you what I did, because I started getting some calls right after Schoonover and Mills. Somebody reached out to someone in the media, obviously, and let them know. But, we give you this as soon as we can. As soon as the case is finished, it becomes public record, and we'll give it to you. But I think I have a duty to the employees for them to hear it from me before I come in here and tell you what's going to happen.
Do you think she should have known, though, before all of us, though?
Well, not really. I mean, we certainly would have gotten with her. The trouble was that we ended up having to do it tonight because the dispatchers work on the midnight shift. They don't come to work till 6:30. The detective people work during the day. I had people off earlier in the week. I couldn't get them. It was really a bit of a logistics juggling act, and we were planning to try to do it first thing in the morning because they would have been closer together. And then somebody took off tomorrow, and I was told that, so we pushed it all into the night to get it done. So we were doing that.
Did this internal investigation, I apologize, did this internal investigation at all, did it include a review of the check that investigators did into Donald Smith's whereabouts in the days prior to Cherish's abduction? Meaning when they did that, I don't want to call it a welfare check, but the check that they do on sexual offenders of him at his home, was that reviewed as well?
No, it wasn't really part of this. My understanding is whether it was the day of or the day before, all they do is verify that he is living at the address that he says he does. That's all the law says that we do with offenders, and they have done that.
And they didn't look into the van, they didn't look into the home?
We're really not allowed to do that. We just go there and we verify that they're there.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between a
Just a
level?
second, please. Add his hand up a couple times.
Schoonover has indicated 2 times being reported that he may run for sheriff. This I hear has nothing to do politically.
Are you asking me, does this have anything politically to do? I made these decisions on this. I'm retired in less than 2 years, and I'm not running for sheriff. I don't really care who's running for sheriff. So, no, politics has nothing to do with it.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between a level 2 reprimand and some of the other options on the team?
We have discipline starts at a level 1 reprimand for us, and then we have a level 2 reprimand. It's just a little more serious. And then beyond level 2, you go into suspensions or demotions or loss of pay or termination. It
So
goes
it's
along.
the highest reprimand before suspension?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Schoonover's background, as well as Mills. How many years they've been here?
Gosh, I don't have that, but we can get it for you. Schoonover's been here longer than I have. I've been here 25 years. I don't really know how long Sergeant Mills has been here. We can get that for you, but I don't have it.
Was Robinson the one that the initial 911 call came to?
Yes,
So that's the person that initially took that call?
yes.
Okay, and that's the one, she or he, that listed this as a missing person?
Right, that's a she, and she was told tonight that when she got to work, that she would be receiving a 3-day suspension. Sorry.
Do we know when Cherish died, and whether this attorney would have done anything?
No, I don't think that we do, and honestly, the window is small enough that I'm not sure they could ever tell you definitively. I think when you have one of those that you find much later, they can kind of go back to a range, but when you're talking about, like I said, between the time that we got there and actually found her, it was 9 or 10 hours, so I don't think you'd be able to tell in that short time range.
Is this uncomfortable for you, this type of internal investigation, knowing that you have to discipline officers?
It's not the favorite part of my job. Look, as the undersheriff, it's one of the responsibilities that I have. Every internal case that's investigated is reviewed up the chain of command. Now, this one really sort of wasn't, because it went through 3 different chains of commands. We had communications, we had patrol, and we had investigations. So I just had those 3 directors get together and look at it and then get with me. But anything that goes up to a level 2 written reprimand stops at the director level. Anything that's a suspension, demotion, loss of pay, or termination, I sign off on. And I've been the undersheriff for 2.5 years, and unfortunately we've had to do that with a number of people. But, you know, I tell people around here all the time that they're very close together, so I don't want them to get their feelings hurt. My first responsibility is to the citizens of this community. My second responsibility is to this agency, and my third responsibility is to those officers out there. We have policies and we have rules, and if they follow those, I'm going to stand behind them all day. We didn't follow all of them in this case. I don't think it would have changed the outcome, but they should have done it. You know, if we'd have gotten a couple additional people out there and notified you guys and gotten it on the air by 2:30 in the morning when we really started knowing what we had, we would have been all we could have done. So.
Are you disappointed at all in your officers?
A little bit. I'm a little disappointed, primarily more so at the scene. Look, Sergeant Mills did some really good work. I think the sheriff said that. But there were some things he should have done that he didn't do. And some of that maybe had to do with the fact that he was overwhelmed out there a little bit, because he should have had more help than he had. He should have had a supervisor there, which was the lieutenant. That's why the lieutenant, who didn't do anything except not show up, got more discipline than the sergeant did.
And is it standard to have these internal investigations into every case, or what prompted, I guess, this investigation?
Well, anytime we can do it a couple of ways. Kind of depends on minor things that happen. We can just look at it without sending it to internal. I mean, a lot of minor cases that come into internal are sent out to a lieutenant on the street to investigate, because they can do that. They're trained to do that. A case like this, we wanted to know, did we do anything wrong? What should we have done differently? And then, partly too, because it involved 3 different departments. Our agency split into 5 departments. It involved 3 of those departments, so we needed one place to do the investigation. I couldn't have an investigation done here, and here. It would have been disjointed.
Do you know when their appeal process starts and when they will have a
It
hearing?
depends on the contract. I know for, and I don't know exactly what all of them are doing. Lieutenant Schoonover can ask for a couple. He has about 3 different options that he can ask for. We have what's called a disciplinary hearing board. If he requests that, we'll set it up for him. It takes 2 or 3 weeks to get that set up usually, and it depends if we've got one scheduled that week and we have to push it a little bit. He can choose to go to an arbitration or to civil service. He can choose just to grieve it up through the chain of command. So I have to see what his choice was, and then we'll work through that process. I know I talked a lot, but there were some questions about this. I want to make you feel fairly comfortable with the process and what we did. So
Is this the end of this investigation?
this is the end of this investigation, except for the appeal process. That may go on for months. Sometimes you schedule an arbitration or the civil service, and then one side or the other will ask for an extension, or the arbitrator goes out of town and he moves it. So, but it'll all be wrapped up in a matter of 3 or 4 or 5 months, I would guess.
How many weeks did this take?
It says on here that on June 28th that the sheriff requested this investigation be done, and you've got that in front of you. It's fairly lengthy. We actually, the lieutenant in internal affairs, Steve Galler, personally did this case because it involved supervisors and other lieutenants, and and there's the logistics of getting all these people in for the interviews and going through all the, he listened to the tapes and he listened to all that stuff. So it took a couple of months, 8 or 10 weeks, I guess. We have 180 days to get these things done. And So we were well inside that.
Is there anything else you want to say?
My voice is about gone. Thank you.